The surgeon's hands were steady, sweat beaded on their brow. They deftly manipulated the surgical robot's controls as a small cutting laser sliced yet another cancerous growth away from the patient's liver. The surgeon smoothly brought down a pair of forceps, gripping the growth and gently pulling it to the side as the cutting laser burned through small connective tissues with a practiced ease. With a motion as smooth as silk, the growth was lifted away and placed on a metal tray with more than a dozen others, each one covered in small, angry-looking pustules. But still, the surgeon's work was not yet done. The surgeon's hand movements flowed like water as blood vessels were unclamped and reattached. Connective tissues gently and painstakingly stitched back into place. The rib cage was allowed to relax as the surgeon finally pulled the two hand limbs of scale skin together and stitched it shut with nanosutures. The surgeon stepped away from the machine and let out a long, deep breath. She checked the patient's vitals again, even though she'd been checking them every 30 seconds during the operation. They were a little weak, but they were stable. In a matter of fact, the patient's vital signs were starting to grow slightly stronger. Dolores nodded to her team as she stepped out of the operating room. She'd been operating on that poor little boy for more than 24 hours, and she was exhausted. But this next part couldn't wait, as she threw open the double doors to the patient waiting area, where two Aganians clutched each other and looked up to her with barely concealed hope. Dolores smiled softly, tiredly. "Your boy is going to be okay. We'll need to keep him in the ICU until he's recovered from surgery, but we managed to remove 99% of the growths. With a little more treatment, he'll be cancer-free." The two Aganians burst into tears, clutching each other even tighter as they wailed in relief. Dolores smiled and quietly left them to cry, her own eyes moist as she made it to her personal sleeping quarters. A photo of a small child sat next to a blue glazed urn on her desk. Gently, she touched the photo of her sister and let the tears fall. "Nobody will have to go through what you did. Not if I can help it." Verso cried as the flames lit the walls around him. He could hear his mother screaming his name outside, but the fire blocked his way to the door. The entire house was engulfed in flames, except for the small spot of tile he was sitting on, clutching his knees to his chest with all four arms. He was scared. So scared. He wanted his mum to hug him, to tell him everything is going to be alright, but the fire was getting closer, and it was getting harder to breathe. "Mama!" he screamed. Then the angel appeared, wreathed by the flames that threatened to swallow the poor Solarian boy. The angel's black and chartreuse clothing barged through the flames untouched. The visor of the mask on their face was covered in soot. But still they ran to Verso. Wrapping him in a blanket that sealed him away from the heat of the fires. They were moving fast. There was a groaning noise from all around them, and suddenly Verso was flying through the air. The heat and smoke of the house suddenly gone as someone caught him. An almighty crash and roar echoed off into the night as his mother pulled him from the blanket and hugged her precious boy to her chest, but she still wailed in grief. Verso turned his head to look for the angel, but all he saw was the collapsed, burning wreckage of his home. The young boy's heart sank as he saw the dozens of other similarly dressed angels desperately trying to douse the raging inferno. One was now down and bent forward, pounding the ground with their fists as they screamed at the burning wreckage. Patrol Officer Willens calmly looked down the barrel of the blaster pistol, held by the clearly distressed Volusian. His fellow officers had their guns drawn to bear on the pistol-wielding madman. The crowded shopping centre was a really bad place for a shootout to occur. Softly, Officer Willens asked, "What's on your mind, son?" The Volusian's 12 eyes all looked erratically around as the Volusian waved the pistol around, spluttering and shouting, "I don't want to have to hurt anyone, but he says I have to. He says I've got to make them pay." Officer Willens nodded sympathetically, calmly asking, "Who says you have to make them pay?" The Volusian wildly gestured the gun at the empty space behind him. "He is. He said..." Officer Willens formed a fist and from the surrender stance, drove it directly into the Volusian's temple, dropping them like a box of rocks before kicking the pistol away. He frowned as he knelt down and gently slid a pair of cuffs onto the Volusian. I'm sorry for that, I really am. But you gotta stay on your meds, Kleb. You get a little unhinged when you don't. Let's get you to the hospital, man. I've got a lot of paperwork to do after this. The Volusians screamed in response as they woke up from their impromptu nap. Captain Jim looked at the hologram of the Nivian warlord and sighed. I already told you, fuck off. I'm not surrendering this planet. He glanced back as his crew hastily loaded themselves into the escape pods. Backup was still 30 minutes out, and he needed to stall the Nivian hive as long as possible. He was extremely lucky they were picking up the debris field around him as a small fleet of ships, but he knew it wouldn't fool them for long. He could see the scanner tech behind the warlord finally starting to figure it out. He heard the sequential hiss and thump of the escape pods being ejected. He breathed a sigh of relief. Being the close orbit equivalent of a garbage collector was always interesting, but every now and then you got mistaken for a planetary defense fleet. Like now. Wait, you're alone up here? The Nivian warlord both asked and stated at the same time. Jim nodded. Yep, I'm a close orbit dumpster dumper. And if you'll excuse me, I have some trash to take out. Jim engaged the hyperdrive, his trash collection ship firing forward like a railgun slug. Tearing through the Nivian ship from bow to stern, the ultra-reinforced Titanite garbage trawling ship was barely scratched. Alarms wailed inside Jim's ship as he extricated himself from a stack of tumbled lockers. God, that line was cheesy. Wait, I'm not dead?